Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to this week's Restore UK podcast, coming to you straight from the home of Robert Burns. And I'm delighted to introduce and welcome to the show tonight, for the first time, David Kirkwood from Reform UK Scotland. David, good evening.
Thank you very much for asking me along. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's very appetite, because I'm in Freshshire, which is where Burns spent a lot of his life.
And where he's buried, I'm told. So I learned today. I did not know that. Anyway, there you go. So as is now traditional on this show, I'm not sure how many of these you've seen, David, if any, but what I normally do is I ask my guest to give a little pen portrait of him or herself, just to tell us all about your life up until this moment. Who are you? What are you? Tell us all about yourself, please.
Okay, very briefly. I'm an engineer. Manufacturing engineer by training and profession, but I've spent most of my life as a freelance IT consultant, and in fact this month is 25 years as a freelancer, and I've worked in about 40 different companies across Britain and Europe. Spent quite a bit of time in Scandinavia and 4 years living in Luxembourg, working for the world's biggest bank, which was very interesting. Try not to hold this against me, but I've been a lifelong SNP voter.
What? Get off the show. Go on.
Since 1979, which was the first election I was able to vote, right up until 2015, I voted SNP pretty much every time, except I think for once. And then in 2019, I spoiled my paper. I voted to leave. I voted yes in 2014 for independence, and I voted to leave the EU in 2016. But the reasons why I did it were practical rather than ideological. Working on the basis of a small political unit is much easier to manage and much easier to change than a big one is.
Yep.
That's really the reason why I wanted to do that. But since 2016, 17, the SNP have just gone completely nuts. So there was no way I could ever vote them again. So in the last elections in May last year, I stood a candidate in the Scottish Parliament elections for a unionist party, Reform UK Scotland. And I'm now the South Scotland organiser. And as of last week, I am the constituency spokesman for Dumfriesshire, Tweeddale and Clydesdale. And we'll be contesting this seat at the next election if all goes well.
Excellent, good for you. So we'll touch further on your Damascus conversion, and I'll tell you a little story about my dim and distant past also. But what I wanted to ask before that is, traditionally also the second question I ask is, what was it made you take the jump into politics? What was it made you become actively involved and indeed stand in last year? What drove you to do that? What were you trying to, had you been elected, what would you have done in Holyrood, do you think?
The driving emotion would probably be fury, I think, more than anything else. The secondary frustration. The very first involvement I ever had in politics was 2005. I was living in Straven at that time. And South Lanarkshire Council had a programme of renewing all the schools. And the plans they had for Straven Academy were not to the liking of the Straven people. So we got together an action group and we tried to fight them for it, and they just refused to engage with us entirely. They just bullied and prevaricated their way to the decision that they wanted. So in the next election, but part of that is that protest that we had a march in Straven, and it was the biggest march since 1820, the biggest demonstration that Straven has seen since 1820, and at that time 3 folk got hanged for it. So we got away light on that one. But in 2007, in the next council elections, I was the agent for an independent candidate to try and get in and do something about the council. So that was the first act of politics, and we got her in. And she was an excellent councillor for 4 years. So yeah, that was what we're doing. The next time would be probably 2019, I think, 2018, 2019, when the Brexit Party arose. As I said, I voted for independence in 2014, my main motivation in that was to get Scotland out of the EU. I didn't think that Britain would ever leave. I wanted Scotland, I wanted to be out of the EU. So I voted for Scottish independence, partly to get Scotland out of the EU, because the EU had already said an independent Scotland would not get back in. So I thought that was one way to do it. Obviously, that went the wrong route at that point, but the right route as it turned out, because we did it finally, at least start to leave in 2016. But the Brexit Party arose at frustration at the lack of progress in actually getting out of the EU. I wasn't really actively involved with them then. I sent a wee bit of money, but I got onto their list. And when reform was being put together back in 2019, I think it would be now, I got a call. Well, I'm saying, you were in the Brexit Party, or involved in the Brexit Party, would you like to be involved in reform, which is the new party? And I said yes. So I've been involved in this party properly since autumn of 2020, late autumn 2020.
Right.
And yeah, now I'm South Scotland organiser for them.
Wow, very good. Well, you've been actively involved in with a political party for roughly the same length of time as I have. So yeah, like you, I'll fess up here because I'm a man who can take it. I can own up to my previous sins. I noticed, because I knew that story. It's not a surprise to me. I knew you had a little bit of a pro SNP or pro possibly independence background. When I was, God, what age would I have been? I must have been 13. So yeah, it was when the one of the general elections in the 70s. I think it was one of the two in 1974. In our history class, it's at secondary school. They said, right, who wants to let's enact a general election? So who wants to be Conservative? And a friend of mine, and she stood for the Conservatives. She's now big time Labour, bizarrely. Another friend of mine stood for Labour, who is actually still a Labour councillor over in Dunfermline or somewhere. Somebody stood as an independent, somebody stood as a Liberal, as they were in those days, and they said, right, who wants to be a nationalist? So I said, okay, I'll be a nationalist. And this is, at that point, the school teacher asked the most redundant question any school teacher has ever asked any pupil, which was, David, are you going to be a Scottish nationalist or a Welsh nationalist? I thought, well, there's a good question. There's a really telling question. That really needed asked that, didn't it? And I've seen the history teacher since, and I said, do you remember asking me that? He said, well, yeah, the thing is, you've got a Welsh name, David Griffiths, which it's a Welsh name, but, I mean, seriously, mate, come on. Anyway, so that was me. I stood for the SNP, and I think I came second. I think the Conservatives won that day, anyway, in the class. So now the reason I did, I'd be interested to hear this, and the reason I really hope everyone is going to be understand where we're going here, because as far as I see it, the only way we're going to move away from this impasse in Scotland is by persuading people to stop voting SNP, because at the moment there are just too many of them. Yeah. They're winning almost 50% of the votes cast. Now, you can only go so far. You can't get any other people to vote if they don't vote, because, as I've said many times, the problem with people who don't vote is they tend not to vote. That's the problem. So there's no point looking at them saying, look at all these wonderful votes we could get. You can't. They're just people who don't like voting. That's it. So as long as you've got a party which has got almost 50% of the vote, the only way you can beat them is by getting one party to stand against them and persuading some of their voters to come away from them. So it's vitally important that we understand maybe what makes people vote SNP and what it was, understand and recognise what it was that made some people turn away from it. Now, I'll go first. If you don't mind, I'll go first and I'll explain my journey. I was one of the guys, you'll have heard of the steel town of Corby in Northamptonshire. You'll have heard the story of Corby, which is a place where lots and lots of people have got Scottish descendancy. It was built in between the 30s and the 70s. And the idea was, instead of they had lots of iron ore deposits there, and some mandarin worked out that, rather than mining all this iron ore and transporting it to steel plants all around the UK, why don't we transport the labour resource down to Corby, and we'll build a town here, and then that will be cheaper. So that was it. So that's where the town came from. Now, I was moved away. I had quite a nice upbringing, just up the coast from here in Troon, and I loved living there. And I was told, easy living, right, you're moving to Corby in Northamptonshire. I was like, what? Are you insane? I'm not going there, you know. So I think my mum and dad thought I was going to run away from home or something, you know, but I was too young. Anyway, so I moved away and I thought, this is terrible. This is ridiculous. Why should we Scots have to go and live in England just to get a job and all the rest of it? I had this kind of sense of indignation, and that carried me for quite a long time to this idea that Scotland has got to have its own voice and all that stuff. Then I went to university, then I studied economics and stuff, and I thought, yeah, I see now, right? Okay, so you've got an unsustainable nationalised industry, and you're going to try and just keep that going, you know, ad infinitum with public money, while it's losing money hand over fist, where you can get cheaper steel from overseas. That's just not going to happen, guys. So all of this anti-Thatcher and anti-capitalist rhetoric, which I remember from the late 70s and early 80s, I realised that was just a lot of absolute nonsense. And as I got into working, I realised also that so many industries in Scotland struggle because the market just isn't here. There isn't a big enough market in Scotland. There simply aren't enough people with enough money. And you certainly can't attract enough inward investment because all of the criteria which you have to satisfy in order to build a successful business, you know, you have to look at the geographical climate, the political climate, the availability of resource, all that stuff, transport infrastructure. We don't really meet any of them because the weather's terrible, the geographical climate, and the political climate could not possibly be more uncertain. So nobody's going to come and set up in Scotland. And I realised that, and I thought, well, there's no point just saying, oh, we want to be independent, we want to be free. That means precisely nothing whatever. So I have now gone completely the other way. When it came to 2014, I didn't want the Yes campaign to win. I wanted them to lose, but I wanted it to be delivered in such a way that the UK government would think, right, okay, we're going to do something to make sure Scotland feels part of things moving forward. I think that the whole Yes campaign, or the No campaign rather, the Better Together, was poorly done. I didn't think it was particularly well done, but I was delighted that it was a firm rejection. And it was a very, very convincing rejection. Only Glasgow and Dundee voted yes, pretty much everybody voted no. So it couldn't be much clearer. Like you, I know that the SNP traditionally are a party of Brexit skeptics, if you like. They were pro-Brexit before Brexit was even a name. They cynically, opportunistically grabbed onto the EU as a potential way of widening some imagined gap between Scotland and the rest of the UK, and that's just a lie. We know they were lying about it. We know they were just doing that to try and make a point and say to people, quick, vote to stay in, because then we can say that that these English people have voted against what we wanted. And they keep quoting this figure: we voted 60-40 or 62-38 against Brexit, but we're being taken out by London. Well, London voted 60-40 as well. So how does that work? So crazy. So that's how I came to come to the other side. So is that in any way similar to your conversion? Would you say?
Yeah, a lot of it's very similar. I mean, obviously, my exposure to England came much later than yours. Although I didn't live that far from the border, it was Straven. It's not that far from the border.
Sure.
But I'd been in 4 other European countries before I made it to England. I was probably about 18 before I made it over the border. So I didn't have a lot of exposure to English culture as such. That wasn't an issue at all. Anything I was thinking. So yeah, and you're talking about industries there. You know, we've had a lot of government interference in industry, which really hasn't done a lot of good over the years. You know, look at the Bathgate, BMC at Bathgate, or Linwood plant. All the inward investment that the government spent so heavily to bring in. IBM was good for a while, but when times go hard, off they go again. Singer, huge manufacturer, and Clydebank disappeared again. And of course, the worst of all was Chung Wah at Hollytown, which I think they got 160 million pounds and never laid a brick for the plant. Yeah, it's
unbelievable.
Government should just not involve themselves in that. And you're right. We don't have the local markets to support big things like that unless you can export them easily. But of course, the things that we always did export were locomotives. We built 1/3 of all the steam locomotives in the world, and most of them came out of Springburn. And ships. Yeah. Which are transport items. They export themselves pretty much.
Absolutely right, indeed.
So we can do things. And, you know, we did have the biggest car company, the biggest car factory in the world at one stage. That was Argyll in Alexandria. And I I personally visited the world's biggest computer factory, which was Timex in Dundee in about 1980. They were building the little Sinclair computers, and they were putting out more computers than anybody else, but they're small, easily transported items. So we can do it, but they weren't for local consumption. It's export consumption. So we need the good export links. We need good transport infrastructure.
And we really don't have it. It's true. I mean, I have a very close friend from school days who worked at British, is it BAE Engineering at Prestwick Airport? Yeah. And they used to service parts of aircraft, as I understand it, and build engines and service engines, all the rest of it. And he described to me how they used to get, they had an order from Brazil, which was flown in to the country. And you know the BAE offices are right on Prestwick Airport. They're literally on the airport. And I said, oh, they fly in? He said, actually, no, what we do is we fly them into Heathrow, right? And then how do you get them up? We truck them up the motorway. That's just ridiculous. Seriously. Oh, my God. Anyway, well, maybe they won't do that any longer under Nicola and Lorna's green Scotland, where nobody's going to be allowed to drive anywhere without paying, handsomely for the privilege.
There could have been a regulatory reason for that. When I went to America, first of all, 1981, one of my first proper long-haul holidays, we left from Glasgow, we touched down at Prestwick.
Yeah, and then off again.
Took off at Prestwick again. On the way back, the rules changed while we were in mid-air. So all the people that were expecting to go off at Prestwick ended up in Glasgow.
Oh, lovely.
It's just madness when government gets involved in commerce. Things go
absolutely. Oh, absolutely right. I mean, I'm going back again to my uni days. I remember learning all about non-interventionist governments, and which is what, of course, we had in those days. They wanted to let market forces dictate, and devil take the hindmost, and all the rest of it, and all a little bit, ruthless, if you like. But that's just the way it is. We had to get away from the public sector dependency culture which existed in the 70s. And because remember, Britain went almost bankrupt in the 70s. They were still paying off the debts they'd incurred in winning World War II. And then manufacturing and industrial output was more or less crippled in the 60s and late 60s and 70s by industrial action. And really, it wasn't, when it came to, remember Dennis Healey asking the Labour Party conference if they would back his plans to go to the IMF for a handout, for a bailout. And that's what happened. That's what happens with socialist governments, unfortunately. That's what tends to happen. They believe that they can keep giving and giving and giving and giving without necessarily having the resources to do it. And let's be clear, that's exactly what the SNP plans for Scotland now, because any time you ask, today, for example, on a little chat group of which I'm a member, one of the guys here said, oh yeah, a couple of my relatives are pro-independence. I said, well, can they actually articulate why they're pro-independence? Oh, not really. They just, they're saying they realise that it's going to be worse. We're all going to be worse off, but they're prepared to take that. Oh, that's very generous of them. So they're just going to condemn the rest of Scotland to being poorer because they're quite happy with that. Oh, yeah, really? Oh, lovely. So it's just ludicrous. So there is no. On the other podcast in which I participate, the majority, the guy from the majority, Mark, they would continually posts, there is no path to a second referendum. Time to move on. And there isn't. They're not going to get one. They're absolutely not going to get one. Maybe they think when Boris Johnson goes, his successor will be a wee bit more of a mind to grant Scotland a second independence referendum, but not a chance. It's not going to happen. You listen to any of the Conservative MPs in Westminster, every one of them is like, no. Penny Mordaunt, all these guys, they just completely dead bat it and say, look, you're not getting it. You've had your vote, and that's it. Quite rightly so. Now, the only problem is the damage that does constitutionally. Who knows what damage it's doing? Because the SNP will spin it, is they're denying us our democratic right. We know they're going to take it to the Supreme Court to see whether they can actually call a referendum. I'm hoping against hope that gets resoundingly rejected. But who knows? Who knows when the judiciary is seemingly in the Scottish Government's pocket? But dreadful, really. So, I mean, there's clearly is not only no path to referendum, there is no blueprint for the SNP to achieve independence, because the big thing, if you remember in 2014, I think the phrase was, unless there is a material change in circumstances, then there won't be another referendum. And so they opportunistically used Brexit, as I said. and use that as the material change. But if you ask a nationalist, okay, how are you going to get back into Europe? Oh, well, we don't really need to get back into Europe. Oh, really? Well, in that case, what's the material change? Because either that's what's holding you back. And this whole idea of independence. So you want to break away from the most successful economic, social, and political union in history, certainly in the modern age, to jump into pretty much a discredited trading bloc. That's what you want to do, really. Okay. But you want to be half in and half out because you want to keep the pound. Although the pound will be the UK pound, the British pound, and you'll be a foreign country to Britain, but you want to keep it. Right, okay, well, that's clear. And so, but you can have your own currency one day, right? And if you talk to their currency guy, Tim Ryder, he'll say, oh, yeah, we can do it in a couple of months. New currency, couple of months, no problem at all. A couple of months, right?
Yeah, it's just, isn't it?
That's just nonsense. So, I mean, people make this comment quite often these days. There is no independence campaign. There's an independence industry, and it's keeping a... I know does every year to say, don't worry, next year. She's done it again now, next year. Yeah. Sophie Roworth, whatever her name was, from the BBC, and somebody said, hang on, you said this in 2017, you said it in 2019, you said it in 2020. When are you actually going to deliver us? Oh, soon, well, when soon? When? No, you can't keep going on doing this. But I mean, it literally is marching our people up to the top level just to march them back down again. There's no, a lot of people feel that they don't actually have a desire to see an independence referendum because they probably wouldn't win it anyway, to be honest. At least I hope they wouldn't. But who knows? Who knows how people will vote?
I don't think they would win now. I think there are enough people like myself who've had a look at it. There's quite a few of us in the Reform Party. We were SNP supporters, we were SNP voters, but we have had the Damascene conversion. We have had a good look at what would happen with the SNP. The thing is that the SNP now is not the party that I supported for years. When you don't have a reasonable chance at achieving power, you attract people who are in it for principled reasons.
Yep.
What the SNP have now, and they certainly have since 2014, are time servers and careerists. They don't have the principled intellectuals who drove the party in their earlier years. I'm going back to the 70s. I joined the party in 1976. And I was dealing with people there whose ambition was to become an SNP councillor. And a lot of them did that. And in fact, one of the reasons why I continued to vote SNP was that they took over East Kilbride District Council in those days. And they ran the council very well. Now, can you point to an SNP council anywhere in Scotland today that is run very well? And
absolutely no.
I think a lot of the reason for that is that the SNP members are people who have joined a party so they can get some power, not so that they can do something for their country or for their community. Now, at the moment, the Reform Party is in the initial stage. We are a party of non-politicians, people who might stand as independents somewhere, but we've found a lot of other people who think the same way as us. And we've achieved enough common understanding that we have a reasonable manifesto and a reasonable way forward. And we're in this to try and make a difference. We're not in this for any kind of career. No, I'm certainly not. I'm 61, I'll be 62 next week. I'm not looking for a long-term career in politics. Although I've quite a lot of younger members. But we would, we're talking about things, within the party, we're talking about things like minimum time served in commerce or trade. Before you're allowed to be a candidate. And we're talking about term limits for candidates so that long-term political careers cannot happen within the party.
Quite right.
So that we have people who are in there for the right reasons, who want to make a difference to the community, and they're not there for their own purposes.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you look at I can remember doing analysis of the target seats back in May last year, because I was, they asked me to be constitution spokesperson for All for Unity. So what I did was I got to grips with the don't, I don't know how you pronounce it, voting system, which was at first glance unbelievably complex. And it really took me, I did studying, this was like university level stuff, to get to understand it. And I became probably the guy who understood it better than anybody in the party. Anyway, what I also did was, what was I telling you there? Oh yeah, I was looking at where we might win seats. So I did a little analysis of all the people in the West Scotland region, which is where I stood. And I said, okay, I looked at, there were 10 constituencies, and I looked at the candidates in each, and I obviously, Jackie Bailey was one in Dumbarton. So we said, well, there's no point. I was trying to stand there because we didn't stand in any constituencies at the end. But when we were looking at it to start with, we were looking at who we were going to promote and say to people, this is the guy you should vote for. And I was looking at the seats like Paisley and Greenock and places like that. Big SNP vote. Absolutely zero chance of a Conservative or Liberal Democrat getting any votes there at all. Mm-hmm. So I was looking at the SNP candidates and who might be vulnerable. And I cannot remember who. It was something like 6 or 7 of them. I looked at their biography, and it's left university, became an SNP councillor, 26 years of age, and now standing for Holyrood. And there would be one, and then another, and another, and another, and another. Yeah. Are you for real? What do you want to vote for these people? And they've only just got out uni, for goodness sake. They've never had a job. Yeah. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. And so there's no doubt that there are people on the opposition benches also who are there simply to pass some time and get a lovely little pension and maybe even get into the House of Lords if they get to lead the party. Now, that to me, this is what Holyrood's all about. See, this is what the push for devolved government was all about, so that a handful of Tories and Labour people can make it into the House of Lords. Seriously, guys, that's your ambition, is it? My God. So, no, I would back that, absolutely. So okay, so we've talked for almost half an hour about how we came to be where we are, and that's all interesting stuff. But what I'd like to do is open up the floor to you, David, so you can tell us about Reform UK. Now, I'll just preface this a little. I can remember, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but about a year ago, when I was writing articles before the election, I was asked to write an article about what I thought about Michelle Ballantyne's decision to leave the Conservatives and join Reform UK. And I wrote in this, I can't remember what was it in one of the, I think Scotland or the Majority, I forget which one. I think it was the Majority. And I said, well, she's going to be working for Nigel Farage, and he's never really going to make any inroads in Scotland. So I don't think this is the right move for Reform UK, and I don't think it's the right move for Michelle Ballantyne either. So that wasn't unpleasant. I just said, I don't really understand why she's doing this. And I can understand it a bit now. Obviously, she lost her seat. She didn't do very well, bless her. Is she still involved, incidentally, Michelle? She's still very much involved with the party?
She's a party leader in Scotland.
Cool. Okay, cool. Right. Yeah, yes. Pete Morris is asking, is she still with Reform? Yes, she is, Peter. Indeed, party leader. So anyway, that was my only, if you like, connection with Reform UK. But I know Martin Green very well, and he and I have spoken about this. And I a couple of weeks ago, I thought, well, Martin's always pushing for us, if you like, us nomads in Scottish politics. You know, all we are is pro-UK. We don't really have a party. So he said, well, why don't you come along with Reform UK? So I thought, right, okay, why don't you, Martin, or your appointed representative, come on and tell us about it? So you've got as long as you'd like for the next few minutes to tell us about Reform UK, just from the top, really, and why you think they could be the next pro-UK big thing in Scottish politics.
Okay. Well, I'll give you 5 or 10 minutes about it. Obviously, the party sprang out of the remains of the Brexit Party. And if the Tories had done Brexit properly and got everything all sorted out and we'd still have nonsense like the Northern Ireland Protocol and things like that, probably we wouldn't have existed, because the job would have been done, the party would have been closed down, and everybody would have gone away. But it didn't. And the people who had been involved in the party, the MEPs, and Nigel, obviously, because Nigel's the big name associated with it, just got fed up with it. And they used their experience to revive the Brexit Party apparatus and reform it, or rename it as the Reform Party. So we are a different party. We are not the Brexit Party. We happen to share the same colours, very similar logo, but with a very different structure, because there is Reform UK, which is effectively it's the English party. We have Reform UK Scotland, which is obviously in here, and we have Reform UK Wales. So we have 3 autonomous but cooperative areas, branches that all work together. And in fact, we've been helping them with the by-elections in England. I've done 3 by-elections, I think. Did Hartlepool, Bexley, and North Shropshire. went to help there. Bexley was the best, obviously. We got nearly 7% of the vote. A very good result for a very young party. The party is only 1 year and 1 week old this week, so we are very new. But we're doing all right nationally. As I said, we're not a party of career politicians. We're not a good prospect for somebody that wants to spend their life as a politician. Partly because at the moment we don't have a huge prospect of getting people elected. We might get a few councillors in the May elections. We're certainly hoping for that. But it's going to take a couple of years really to establish ourselves properly. So right at the moment, we don't have the self-seekers who are going to do that. And I said this, we had our first conference in October last year. I was able to speak at it. And I said that in the speech there. If anybody wants to look at them, go to YouTube, look for Reform TV, and you can see all the speeches from the conference. And get an idea of some of the policies and the people that are involved. So we are very much a pragmatic party. We want life to be simpler again. We want government to serve the people. We want to get power dragged away from the centre and back out to the periphery where the power actually should be. Too much power has been aggregated to the centre. We don't have an official policy in Holyrood yet. I'd like to see it down to about 8 people. 1 from each of the parliamentary regions, and all of the Holyrood powers devolved out to the councils. And then some of the council powers devolved out to community councils. We want to get far more power back into education, into head teachers' hands. We want to get a lot of the head teachers away from county council control. And it's really, we really do want to try and get power back to where it should properly be applied, not in central areas. But because we have a lot of practical people who have actually been in business for a long time, we want to do things like reform the tax system. The tax system at the moment is something between, the tax code is something between 17 and 20,000 pages long in Britain. Nobody's actually quite sure. But it's about 6 to 7 times longer than all of the Harry Potter novels combined. So it's far, far too complicated. The first thing we want to do is get that down to about 500 pages. And then we can start slimming it down properly from there. So we need to simplify a lot of the rates. We need to take a lot of people out of tax. We want to take small to medium-sized businesses out of corporation tax. So the first £100,000 would be free of corporation tax completely. Now that would be a huge funding benefit for small companies. And small companies are very often owner managed. So we take a lot of administration off the shoulders of owner managers of businesses as well. So they get more time to actually work in the business rather than working for HMRC. We want to sort the health system out. David Bull, our deputy leader, national deputy leader, has a very ambitious plan to clear all of the NHS waiting lists in 18 months. One of the biggest problems with NHS is the waiting lists, which don't exist anywhere else in Europe. We've just become acclimatised and we just expect them now to take years to get any medical procedures. But he's got a scheme to clear all the waiting lists in 18 months by utilising the private sector. If the NHS can't provide a GP appointment in 3 days, you'll get a voucher to see a private GP. If they can't provide specialist treatment within 6 weeks or so, you'll get a voucher to go private and get it done that way. Now, it wouldn't actually cost us any more because the money that we'd be spending on the private treatment would be going to the NHS in the other instance. So the NHS might lose out on a wee bit of funding, but in many cases it'll be the same personnel that are carrying out the procedures, just in a different setting.
Sure.
And after 18 months or so, once we have cleared off the waiting lists, then the whole system becomes much easier to manage and we can actually see what's going on. We want to do away with targets because health targets are a complete nonsense. You know, what's the point of saying you want to have 95% of A&E patients seen within 4 hours?
Yeah.
People just work to targets. They don't work to optimum performance. What you have to do is to just measure the performance, find out where the good performers are, and apply their practices in the places where the performance isn't as good, which is a standard industrial practice, just using industrial KPIs. Again, back to business, want to do things like 100% of capital allowances in the first year, so effectively they just become like revenue. And again, this is a particular benefit for small businesses because you're not then having to amortise capital expenditure over several years. It's a big hit to the cash flow, and it's a lot of extra administration, which either you're doing yourself or you're paying an accountant to do. We're not going to be the accountant's friend, because we're going to make life very much simpler for people in business. Yeah. So you're going to say something?
No. So I'm just nodding because I mean, I've worked in IT consultancy also, like you, and my biggest bugbear. This is just tangent here. Excuse us a minute, guys. My biggest problem, the biggest frustration in IT was you go into a place and you'd say, okay, this is what we need you to do. And I'd say, great, okay, who do you want me to report into for this? The finance director. And you just think, oh God, no. Oh, please, guy. Anytime you hear that, you just think you have no idea what you're doing, do you? You've no idea. That goes back to the days like the 70s, where the finance director was responsible maybe for changing the big tape spools and all this nonsense because he was the only one who knew how to do it. Now to have an IT, it's like having your HR or your marketing director report to your HR director. It makes no sense at all. Why on earth would you do that? I detest it, and I always say about the NHS in Scotland, the NHS in the UK, in the rest of the UK, is bad because it's run by accountants. The NHS in Scotland is doubly bad because it's run by accountants who can't count. That's the problem we've got. I mean, the NHS in Scotland is frankly not fit for purpose. Far from it, anything but. I detest it. I think it's just dreadful. And I don't mean the people. The people work extraordinarily hard, but they have a Herculean task in cutting through the vast swathes of idiotic red tape and crippling hours and totally ineffective management. I think it's just how not to run any business, certainly not a health service. I mean, the very idea of having an accountant who will make decisions based solely on numbers when you're dealing with people's lives and well-being is monstrous. So I would back you every way on that. You're right. You've got private people who do NHS work. You've got NHS doctors who do private work, and we're throwing our hands up in horror saying, "My God, how can you privatise the NHS?" Well, come on, guys, let's just get real here. You've got a massive, completely monolithic, utterly incompetent health service. It's never going to get right. You're never going to get rid of these queues with the staff you've got. Not a chance. Absolutely no chance. The queues will only get worse. And Thurston will say, oh, well, it's 1.2% better than in England in this one count or some nonsense like that. And they think that's going to be it. Okay, dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. So, okay, cool. So you've actually got an interesting set of proposals there. Right, okay. So who do you see as your target demographic? Who do you see as the people you want to vote for Reform UK Scotland?
Well, the thing is, most people see us a bit rather as turquoise Tories. And I certainly don't see myself like that. As far as I'm concerned, and you mentioned this before yourself, our target audience has to be independent-minded SNP voters.
Yeah.
Not necessarily independence-minded, but independent-minded. I think a huge swathe of the current SNP vote is people who want to have more control over their own lives, want the control over their own lives, which they don't have to be wielded locally, rather than either in Holyrood or in London, but can't stand the SNP. I think a lot of the SNP vote is reluctant. But they're saying some of the right things, even though they can't deliver any of them.
Absolutely.
And people vote for them in hope rather than expectation. And I'm hoping that we can project a business-like ethos towards people. We're going to say, well, we're not going to do everything for you, but we're not going to take as much of your money either. You're going to have more money to do things for yourself when you want them, how you want them done.
Yeah,
and
totally get that.
And the power to control your life will be down in your community.
That I think has to be the ultimate aim. I mean, we have to get devolution down to a local level because it's only then that anything's going to happen. These chancellors in Hollywood could not run a Minoj. We know that. There's not a chance. You look at the dreadful quality of legislation they've enacted. I talk about it every week. We've got the hate crimes bill now, which is simply an attack on free speech. The Offensive Behaviour at Football Act, I mean, which I still can't believe was enacted. And that was just in an attempt to get Rangers supporters jailed for singing naughty songs. That's all it was. And then when some Celtic supporters started getting jailed, they said, "Oh my God, we've got to get rid of this," and so they did. I mean, that's Scotland for you. It's ridiculous. And really, I mean, but I made the point today on Twitter. You've got the Glasgow Art School, which is burned down twice. Yeah. And the inquiry, which took 3 years, said we don't really know what caused it because all the evidence was destroyed in the fire. So we don't know. Really? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's just rebuild it a third time and keep our fingers crossed that some property developers who want to build nearby don't feel like lighting a box of matches again. When did Glasgow become like Chicago in the 1930s? I mean, how have we stumbled into this? When a building of enormous historical significance right in the heart of the city is burned down deliberately twice. And the inquiry says, I don't know, could have been anything really, don't ask me. I don't know. I don't know. These things happen, God save us. Oh, appalling. So, okay. Listen, one thing I'm just going to do for a moment, just take a little break there, is we're going to get some interaction because we have live interaction here. If you click on your top, you should see the comments. Peter Morris is a great supporter of the show and has been on and graced the show, is asking, would we refer to us as Scots or the people of Scotland? Now, I think I see what he's getting at here. Everyone who lives in Scotland is not necessarily Scottish. So, yes, we are the people of Scotland. You don't have to be Scots. Anybody who lives here is welcome to live here. So I would, if that answers your question, Pete. Pete is also talking about a by-election, a council by-election in East Lothian last week, which was won by Labour, which is better than it being won by SNP, but maybe not a lot, given some of the bizarre decisions being made by Labour these days. Like, for example, was it West Lothian today? West Lothian Full Council. The Labour councillor group voted against the Conservative proposal to write to the First Minister to withdraw, asking her to withdraw any calls for another independence referendum. And the Labour councillor said, no, we're not going to do that. So we've got Labour now, after the 2019 general election, where Jeremy Corbyn and his merry men decided they would try and be both pro-Brexit and pro-Remain, to try and look both ways on a binary issue. And I remember seeing an interview with John McDonnell where he says, Jeremy's out talking to people. He's talking to Remainers. He's talking to Leavers. He's building consensus. And that's how we're going to move forward. How the hell do you build consensus on a binary issue, you fools? Yeah. So now they're doing the same thing with independence. Anna Sarwar wants to be a little bit nationalist and also a little bit unionist. So, where do you stand on this? Well, yes and no. No, you're either yes or you're no, you muppets. You can't be both. So I just have no faith in the Labour Party in Scotland, whatever. None. Absolutely none.
Remember that Anna Sarwar's ambition in the last election was to be a better opposition.
Yeah, absolutely.
To actually win anything.
He admitted that he wanted to be the leader of the opposition. Exactly. David, you're being put on the spot here by Pete Morris. Would you refer to us as Scots or as the people of Scotland? You personally, what would you call your voters?
Yeah, I don't really know if there's much of a distinction. Anybody can be Scottish. I don't really care who you are. If you want to come here, you want to live in this country, or even any other country, and adopt our no-nonsense, friendly, practical attitudes, fine, you're Scottish. I can think of two people that have been actually encouraged to come and live in Scotland. One's Greek, one's Indian. As far as I'm concerned, they're Scots. They love it here.
Absolutely right.
They love it. And yeah, I don't really care who you are, where you've come from. If you want to come here and live and work with us, great, we'll have you. So there's one other comment there I'd like to just pick up. It's quite a hot topic for us. Raymond Stewart there, 835. Says you need to work with the Scottish Family Party. Now, this is something that we get a lot because we are the biggest of the challenger parties at the moment. There's us, there's Reclaim.
Yep.
SDP now are still on the go. UKIP are still on the go. There's quite a lot of smaller parties. The Scottish Family Party is one, and there's quite a lot of other local parties and very small national parties. And we get this comment a lot. And I wrote a blog post. I have my own blog as well, which is a personal one. And I wrote a blog post on it to explain why we don't actually need to do that. And it's possibly not a good thing to do that at all at the moment, which is that right at the moment, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. We've got the council elections coming up. There may be some special arrangements for the council elections strategically within seats. But overall, and with the by-elections in England, it didn't make the slightest bit of difference. None of us were going to win. Something none of us were going to win. But what it did was it exposed the ideas of all of the small parties. to the voters. It also exposed their efficiency, ambition, and resources. A lot of the small parties are simply not going to last. Some people are in this for vanity. I can think of 2 parties particularly which are pure vanity projects, and I'm pretty sure we're not going to cooperate with. I'm certain that we will be cooperating with at least one other party nationally.
Yep.
And I know that locally, we already have locally, we worked with Reclaim in London for the mayoral elections last year. And there will be other strategic alliances in geographical areas. But right at the moment, we know the Scottish Family Party, that they're great, they share a lot of our aims.
Yes.
Good luck to them. But right at the moment, it's not going to make a lot of difference to either of us, whether we joined or one of us merged with the other. We need opposing ideas, new ideas exposed to the voters.
Yep.
And that's what we're trying to do. And we're getting this from other people as well. And we know that at least 2 of our ideas have already been picked up by the larger parties.
Yes.
One was the sort of medical TA. I think it was Michelle's idea. It was either Michelle or David Bill, I can't remember, came up with the idea of a reserve force of medics to cope with things like pandemics.
And what are these retired people, or who was this reserve coming from?
Well, the retired people, because there were a lot of retirees were asked back into the service and couldn't get back in because they couldn't get through the 16 training courses necessary. All the diversity and change and heavy lifting and things like that to get back into a practicing license again. So we would keep on retention. A few days training a year would keep their skills up, because most of these cases, what they're needing to do is fairly simple. We're not looking generally at invasive procedures. If they'd managed it correctly, they'd use the Nightingale hospitals in the way that they should have done.
Absolutely.
People with breathing difficulties and relatively simple needs would have been isolated in the Nightingale hospitals, and they could have been nursed and treated medically by experienced but not necessarily specialist people. Specialist needs would have been taken back into hospital, into ICU and places like that. So that's one, and there was another one. I can't remember what the other idea was. The Tories nicked this one. So that was one that Labour nicked. The Tories nicked one. So we're doing the right thing. We're exposing new ideas, and new ideas are becoming into the mainstream. So I don't mind people taking our ideas as long as they use them. Indeed.
Another question for you, because the questions are really for you tonight, not for me, as I'm not standing anywhere. Family law, an issue which affects thousands and various aspects of society. What do you know about family law, and what's your view on that?
I have no idea in family law. I have knowledge, sorry.
Okay, I guess this is about rights of cohabitants. Is that, forgive us, Peter, is that what you're getting at there? Please just let us know what you're thinking there. If it's about the rights of, say, women who are in cohabiting, that kind of thing. If you just elaborate on what you're asking there, Pete, that would be great. We'll just talk on in the meantime. So we've got about 10 minutes to go, so we'll keep talking. But I'm finding this fascinating, because you're the first, if you like, active politician, somebody who's going to be standing. You are standing, I take it. Yep, Meg, excellent, good, okay. Yep.
Against David Mendell in this seat.
Oh, really? Really? Cool.
Former Secretary of State for Scotland.
I remember. Cool. Okay. So say that again.
There's a last story in Scotland.
Yes, indeed. So it's fascinating, all this stuff, and it's excellent you've come on to be grilled, but we'll no doubt do something again with you good people before May. So what are your ambitions for May? Do you think you can make some, you can capture some seats in May, realistically?
I think we can. I'm spending my time looking for council candidates. So if anybody tonight watching this this podcast has any ambition at all for their local area, would like to do something by standing for the council, and would like a party organisation behind you, we will work with it. We'll give you some sort of national aims, but we'll also help you to formulate local aims for your council, and we'll help you publicise them. We'll help you with a party organisation and just put people behind you. So please get in touch.
And just to, I'm not in any way associated with Reform UK Scotland at all, viewers, listeners.
Yep.
But just to say that, I mean, I know Martin Green very well. What's Martin's role within Reform UK? Is he like the chairman of Scotland or something?
No, he's the Scottish organiser.
Organiser, cool. Well, he's made that point in the meetings we've had, and I've had several face-to-face meetings with Martin and other people. He's made that point numerous times, really, that you've got the backing, you've got very, very significant backing in terms of finances and organisation structure, infrastructure. Terrific. Yeah. So, I mean, these guys are for real. So, I would, if anyone is thinking about getting involved, genuinely, I would encourage you to talk to David or Martin, any of these guys. Yeah.
We are a serious political party now. Although we're not politicians, we have a political organisation behind us. Martin Green, he's an amazing character. Martin's been involved actively in politics for about 25 years now. Yeah. He's not that old, but he's been, he started as a teenager and he has run parties.
Yes.
Over time. And he's an absolutely amazing character. We have an industrial strength candidate management system behind us, membership management system that we're only just picking up now and starting to make work. So if you are registered as a member with us, you'll be getting an email from me sometime in the next few days. We have thousands of members already in Scotland. I was astounded at how many we actually do have. We are a major party. You just haven't heard of us yet.
Indeed, fair enough. Okay. So we've got about 5 minutes to go. So what we'll do is we're going to wrap up. But I wanted to ask a couple of questions about whether, I think you touched on it actually earlier. You said it, and you're quite correct in as much as the SNP of today is not the same as the party of, say, maybe the 1970s or even the 1990s. It's not the same party at all. Something I've noticed, which has really struck me, because I've been away from Scotland a lot. I've lived in probably about two-thirds of my life in England working. And I came back to Scotland again 18 months ago. And I can remember when I went to Scotland, left Scotland the first time, came back just after the the Assembly referendum, which the yes side won narrowly, but because Robin Cook and was it Willie Cunningham, the guy's name? I can't remember. Somebody Cunningham from Falkirk, the Labour guy who said, "Oh no, you got to have 40%. It's got to be 40%." Which was a wee bit cheeky. So I can remember coming up, and I was, of course, very politically aware always. I mean, I made the joke that I made the point last week. I remember the election from 1970. I was only like 9 years of age, and I came downstairs with him and I said, "Who won?" And he said, the Conservatives won." I said, "Who are the Conservatives?" I'd only ever heard of Labour and the Tories. I didn't even know what the Conservative Party was. So that's how dumb I was. I realised I had a lot to learn. But anyway, ever since then, I've been massively interested. Anyway, I can remember coming up in the 1980s thinking to uni and saying, "Don't you guys feel like you've been kind of cheated out of this democratic system?" They all just went, "Couldn't care less, not remotely interested." And the guys I went to uni with all voted Labour, all of them. Apart from a couple of guys who voted Conservative. Mm-hmm. Now, one of those guys who voted Conservative right through the Thatcher years is an SNP guy. Say, "Oh yes, we've been stripped bare by Thatcherism." So, hang on a minute, Charlie. You were voting for her, way back then. And he said, "Well, I've got a right to criticise her because I vote for her." How about you vote against her and criticise her? Wouldn't that be a bit idea? But anyway, so I just don't think these people who are voting SNP are particularly mature in their vote or their electoral outlook, because they're saying things like, all the usual cliches like, "Oh, well, I don't really like the SNP either, but don't worry, when we're independent, you can vote in anybody you like." Oh, can you really? Well, I've got an idea for you. If you want to get the UK Westminster government you like, try voting for someone other than a novelty party who only stand 59 candidates, because they're never going to win. And this is what happened on election night in 2019, December 9, 2019. 4 people unfriended me on Facebook that night because I was saying they were all furious at Labour not winning and the Conservatives winning. And I said, "What did you think was going to happen, guys? You thought Jeremy Corbyn was going to win the election, did you?" "Well, we were hoping." "Right, so who did you vote for him then?" "Oh, no, we voted SNP. So you wanted Corbyn to be the Prime Minister so badly that you voted for another party. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?" And you just think, these people really shouldn't have a vote because they don't know what they're doing. And the problem we've got is there are 2 million of these people or so in Scotland, and about half of them are voting SNP, and you just think this is insane. So somehow, guys like you and guys like us, All for Unity as a pressure group, have got to impress on people without lecturing them, because everybody thinks they really understand politics. Every voter does. They think, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I've researched this and I know the best thing is to vote SNP. That will stop this pipeline Scottish water going down and irrigating England and all this complete fantasy. But you can't lecture anybody about the way they vote. That's one thing I've learned. You can't do it. You've got to just say, well, in my opinion, and these are the facts, blah, blah, blah. I think you should be very careful about this, So there's no point saying, look, you're all a bunch of idiots. That's what Labour Party tried to do in the 2019 election. They're saying, now that we've carefully explained to you all that you're stupid racists, why wouldn't you vote for us? Yeah, thanks, guys. Exactly. Yeah, good. That's a good sales pitch.
One good point you made there was voting for a party with 59 candidates.
Yeah.
We'll have 600 candidates at the general election. We're not standing at the moment in Northern Ireland. We don't have an organisation in Northern Ireland just now, but we intend to have one in every other mainland and island seat.
Very good.
Well
Okay.
on the way to doing that now. We announced the first tranche of 70 candidates or 70 constituency spokespeople who've been called at the moment. It's a sort of probationary period before we become candidates.
Yep.
They were announced last week. There will be another tranche, I think, announced this week, and by probably the back end of this year, we'll have 600 people in place and a growing constituency structure.
Very impressive. One question I have to ask, and this will probably be the last question I'll ask you. What would you say to accusations which were levelled at all of us, probably yourselves, certainly ourselves last May, from pro-UK people saying, all you're doing is splitting the unionist vote. All you're doing is, you're going to cost us seats. All you're doing is handing the election to the SNP. You're just making a bad situation worse. What would you say to accusations of that nature?
What's the unionist vote?
Yeah, quite exactly.
It is not an independence vote and a unionist vote. It's a party vote. That's the situation we're in.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, this is the case. We make this point. We shouldn't even be talking about a union. I mean, there is no union. This is a country. A union took place hundreds of years ago. We are now the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's what we are. We shouldn't be talking in these nationalist, following this nationalist narrative, which is trying to turn us into the second Northern Ireland, with unionists and nationalists. So I refuse to be. So you're quite right. I mean, you will get that thrown at you, though. You'll see it a lot. You'll get people talking about, the unionist parties. Yeah, the union, like Labour? Yeah, right, got you. So, no, I don't think so. So anyway, it's flown by as I knew it would, because I know there's a lot to talk about. I would very much like to get you on again in a few weeks as we get closer to elections.
I enjoyed this,
Excellent. It's terrific, and it's great that we've got this interaction. Pete Morris, again, is saying, come to Pennycook. So there's one you should think about. Talk to Martin about Pennycook.
We will have people. Peter, if you want to get in touch with us, we will help you. If you know somebody there to stand, we'll help them.
There you go. So this has been a little bit of a sales pitch tonight, but deliberately so, because it's only fair to give these guys a platform, and I'm delighted to do so. I know Martin well. I know he's a serious guy. David's clearly the same. So, and obviously respect to Michelle Ballantyne also. So best of luck to you guys. So we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching, and thank you for interacting with us. Thank you, William Torrance. My very great pleasure. It is an enormous pleasure to me to host this podcast every Tuesday. David, thank you. A word for our viewers and listeners from you, sir, if you could.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I've never done anything like this before, so it was a bit scary an hour and 10 minutes ago when this all came to pass, and everybody missed the panic trying to get the headphones working. So I know what to do the next time. But no, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Hopefully next time we'll have more interaction with live comments. And possibly a sales pitch from me. But there's a lot more to talk about.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, best of luck to Reform UK Scotland in May. And been very, very interesting to hear your views tonight, and a lot of common ground there with the way that we are thinking. In the remnants of All Free Unity, which is now just going to be a pressure group, really. But no doubt we'll be doing some work together, so look forward to that. And thank you all for listening, and thanks for watching, and we'll be back again same time next week. Thank you, David, and good night, everyone. Cheers, guys.
Good night. Bye.
There are any number of issues in Scotland that need addressing. Health, education, drug deaths, the economy, but all of those are taking a back seat at this conference to one issue above all else. and that's an independence referendum.
Scotland doesn't want a Boris Johnson government. It doesn't want to leave the European Union, and it wants to be able to determine its own future, whatever that future turns out to be. And this idea that the Tories can just say no and sort of imprison Scotland in a union against its will, I just don't think will hold.
Independence is what the SNP is all about, and Nicola Sturgeon is expected to reinforce that massively at this conference. There will be no chance for people who are against the First Minister's policies to get a hearing.